Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Chills and Thrills panel for Book Your Summer Live. I'm your moderator today, Shannon from Penguin Teen, and we are talking to some of your favorite YA authors today. From bestsellers to debut authors, we have got a killer, pun absolutely intended, lineup to talk all things from twist to chilling cliffhangers to creating that perfect tension we love in a thriller. So don't forget, our panelists will be taking a few of those questions at the end, so make sure to get yours ready. But y'all are not here to hear me talk, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves. First up is debut author of They Wish They Were Us, Jessica Goodman. Jess, welcome to the show, and if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about They Wish They Were Us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Jessica Goodman. I am the author of They Wish They Were Us, which has been out for 2.5 weeks now, which is very exciting. It is a prep school murder mystery that follows Jill Newman, who goes to the very exclusive Gold Coast prep on the North Shore of Long Island. And when she was a freshman, her best friend Shayla Arnold was murdered by her boyfriend Graham. But when Jill starts her senior year, she starts getting text messages that suggests that Shayla wasn't actually killed the way that everyone thinks she was. And so at this point, Jill is part of a very exclusive secret society called the Players. And she realizes that if she finds out who actually killed Shayla, that she might threaten to bring down all of her friends in the Players, the school, and her entire future. So kind of a big deal. Stakes are high.
Kind of a big deal. It's so good, you guys. Our next exciting guest of today is bestselling author Karen M. McManus. Welcome, Karen. And if you can also introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your latest book.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Karen M. McManus. I am the author of the One of Us is Lying series, as well as Two Can Keep a Secret, and coming December 1st, The Cousins, which is my latest thriller. And it is about a very privileged and very fractured family that split apart many years ago, mysteriously. The three cousins who make up the title don't know one another. They've not met since they were little kids, and they don't really understand what happened with their parents a long time ago. And then they are very mysteriously invited to spend the summer with the grandmother who disinherited their parents. And so they go, and almost immediately they start to realize that things are not as they seem, and their family secrets are a lot darker than they realized.
Thanks, Karen. Next up is bestselling author Renée Ahdieh. Renée, welcome to the show, and if you can please introduce yourself and tell us about your latest book, The Damned.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Renée Ahdieh, and I am the author of The Damned, which came out in July. It is a continuation of the Beautiful series, and it is a vampire love story that asks the all-important question, what does it mean to be human? And I'm here because there's a lot of blood and murder.
Very fitting for this panel. Next up, we're talking to author of Wilder Girls and the book that kept me reading all night the other week, Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power. Welcome, Rory, and if you can please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Burn Our Bodies Down.
Hey, and first of all, thank you everybody for having us and for coming and for being at this panel. This is so fun. I'm Rory. I wrote Wilder Girls and Burn Our Bodies Down. Burn Our Bodies Down came out in July, and it's kind of like Sharp Objects by way of the X-Files. It's about a girl named Margot who has grown up not really knowing anything about her family. The only person she knows is her mom, and they live together in this like small Nebraska town, and she wants to find her family. So going off of a clue, she makes her way back to her mom's hometown and ends up wishing she hadn't. It's not a good time for anyone. There's some spooky stuff going on in the cornfields. Corn is terrifying. Like, it's literally, I'm saying this just as a person, I find it terrifying. And Margot does too. She doesn't have a good day, but you'll have to read it to find out exactly why.
Corn is terrifying. After I read it, I decided corn is absolutely
not a good place to be.
All right, so without further ado, let's dive in. I have a lot of questions for you all. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to go alpha order by first name. And my first question is, in all of your books, the setting plays a big part in building the tension and the atmosphere of the read. Cornfields. Whether it's New Orleans, an elite prep school, a mysterious island, or middle of nowhere Nebraska, what was it that inspired the setting of your most recent book? And I'll ask Jess first.
Yeah, so They Wish They Were Us is set on the North Shore of Long Island in a very upscale, exclusive very well off suburb, which of New York City. And it's set there because I grew up in this area, and I was always just fascinated by the different dynamics that kind of come about when you live in the shadow of a big city like New York. And you're kind of part of this world that is, adjacent to all of the extraordinary wealth that exists in a city like that, and also is amplified because of all the space that you have around you. There's like these beautiful beaches and these kind of like funky vacation towns that cater to people who, run the world, but, like take themselves away from the center of the city so they can live a more grandiose lifestyle in some ways. And I always was just fascinated by the way that that area interacted with the rest of Long Island, which is, a very, very diverse place that features a lot of different socioeconomic communities. And so setting an exclusive private school there, it just seemed like a no-brainer.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, so the setting of The Cousins, it's a fictional island called Gull Cove Island, but it's very much inspired by the Massachusetts islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I used to go there as a kid. And first of all, I just love the setting. I love a beach setting. It's something I haven't done before. My books have always been in a high school, but this is a summer setting, and I wanted to be able to stretch myself by trying to create that atmosphere that I had found so interesting as a kid. But I also think it's really interesting that it is an island setting because that's a contained environment. It's a relatively small community. People know one another. It's not a simple thing to get in and get out. You have to make plans to do so. And once you're there, you're often there for a while. And particularly for these kids, their family plays a huge role in the history of this particular island, but they themselves don't know it at all. So they're almost in a fishbowl type of atmosphere where everybody's looking at them, but they're completely unfamiliar with their surroundings. So that was fun to build upon as the mystery unfolds.
Very fun to read as well, speaking because I loved it. Renee, I gotta ask you, why New Orleans?
Oh man, I could probably occupy my own little 45-minute Insta story session or Insta live session on why I picked New Orleans. It's one of my favorite cities in the entire world. And I didn't really realize why until maybe about the 6th or 7th time I went there. I was in a cab going into the city, and I was talking to the driver who had been a lifelong New Orleansian, or New Orleanian. I don't even know how to say it. New Orleansian? I'm not sure. Anyway, so he had been there his entire life, and he told me that I had been a majority-minority city for a very long time. And that instantly made sense to me as somebody who came from a blend of cultures. I never felt at ease anywhere I went. I was always kind of asked, what are you? Not who are you, what do you like? People wanted to put a label on me because I was not easily identifiable. And in New Orleans, I never had to explain myself, not to mention the fact that there's so many different blends of culture there. It was a port city for the slave trade, so unfortunately a lot of people were brought there against their own will, but what has come about from that is this world of music and food and culture that's unlike any other place in the world. And it really spoke to me. And also it's a haven for all of this paranormal stuff, ghosts, vampires, werewolves. The lore of New Orleans has always attracted me. And I really enjoyed with the Dam sort of taking it beyond New Orleans and kind of creating this world within a world. I always like this idea of this magical world, sort of like a filmy overlayer on top of our actual world, where if you know the secret and you know what's going on there and you can see through the glamour of it all, you can see the beautiful decay behind it. So that was always really attractive to me, and it was really fun to get to explore that in The Damned.
We are so grateful you did, because you covered it so well. Rory, dare I ask, the cornfields?
So the book is set in Nebraska. I've always been very into Nebraska. I remember I made a list when I was 16 of places I wanted to go, and it was New Zealand and then Nebraska. And my mom was like, why? And I had no good answer for her. But so I'd always had it percolating in the back of my mind, but it really came about because I was on a phone call with my editor who, Karen and I share the same editor, and I was pitching her an idea for the book that was going to come after Wilder Girls, and I pitched her this thing about a convent. And she was like, "What if we did something else?" And I had no other ideas, so I was terrified, and I was on Pinterest, like with her on the phone, like, I totally have other ideas, scrolling, and I saw this photograph by Ellen Jansen. She's a photographer. She does a lot of these really cool pictures that are like the natural landscape, but they're really kind of stretched, almost like they've been time-lapsed in a way. And I saw this picture that was a hand coming out of this really long grass, and I'm not very good at recognizing what plant is what. So I was like, oh, that's corn. And so on the phone, I was like, what if I did like Field of Dreams, but Field of Nightmares, and like there's no baseball and no Kevin Costner. And Krista very kindly was like, sure, go ahead, see what's going on. So really all the atmosphere came from that one photograph. Actually, Ellen was, I got to talk to her, and like, she's so lovely. She sent me a print of the photograph, and like I sent her the book, and like we swapped, and it was so cool. I owe that photograph and that chance moment on Pinterest everything.
That's wild. So you feel like it may not have even happened if you hadn't seen that photograph.
Oh yeah, I had no other ideas. Zero.
Wild. Okay, so my next questions are split into two groups, and this first one is for Jess and Karen. So you are both clearly masters at hiding plot twists in plain sight without anyone realizing until the end. How do you craft that perfect plot twist, and do you ever feel like you're risking giving too much away by leaving clues right under the reader's nose? Jess, I'll ask you first.
Yes, I'm always terrified of the reader finding out like immediately what's going on, because I think that the best thing that as a reader when you're reading a thriller is like not knowing what's happening, figuring it out at the end, and then going back and finding all the little breadcrumbs that the author left you. So I think that it's a really difficult thing to do. And what I tried to do in They Wish They Were Us was for sure leave clues and kind of give little hints along the way, but make the red herrings believable enough that it seemed like, oh wait, maybe this is actually the way that it's going to go. Or, you know, also creating like B-plot storylines that were hopefully, you know, so engrossing that the reader was just as interested in those as they were in figuring out like who the big bad was all along the way. But I definitely owe my editor so much. Shout out Jess Harridan for like helping me figure out, you know, how many breadcrumbs to leave along the way, and like where they needed to be in the story to keep people, you know, guessing and wondering what was going on.
And it turned out perfect, because I thought I was so smart, like 3/4 through the book, like I know who it is. I did not know who it was.
Well, thank you.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, so I think that ideally, you know, the success or failure of the book does not rest on a successful plot twist, right? Someone's always going to figure it out for sure. And ideally, you want the journey to be just as engrossing as that ultimate aha moment. So kind of building on what Jess said, you know, there has to be something else that's pulling the reader in, and not only bringing them along in the story, but also maybe kind of distracting them a little bit from some of the other things that you're doing. So I find that I always write multi-POV, and my characters tend to be hiding something. Sometimes they're hiding it from the people around them. Sometimes they're hiding it from themselves. But they have their own secrets that are kind of unspooling along with the plot. So that's one way I think that you can not necessarily misdirect, but maybe divert attention elsewhere from some of the machinations of what you're doing in the plot. And I do think it helps also to have little sub-mysteries happening throughout. I think I counted up in Two Can Keep a Secret. There was something like 11 separate mysteries, and some of them were really small and not that significant. And, you know, then there was the actual whodunit type of thing. And having that many elements in play lets you hopefully keep the readers a little bit off balance.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing. And this next question is for Renée and Rory, who are both notorious for creating that eerie feeling that there is something more than meets the eye going on before all is revealed. So my question for you all is, what are the key ingredients to creating that overall mystery? Renée, can I ask you first?
Sure, thanks. I think I really kind of want to piggyback off of what Karen said. I think that it's important to have like some sort of macro conflict going on above everything, but have consistent micro conflicts sort of unspooling beneath them. And as you resolve one micro conflict, reveal another one. I think that that really helps, for me at least, propel a narrative forward. And I totally agree. I don't think a story should rest entirely on one big reveal or one big aha moment or one big whoopsie, I bet you didn't see that coming. I love those, and I love when they really hit me hard. But one of my most favorite sort of aha moments is by Sarah MacLean. She's one of my favorite Regency romance authors, and in one of her series, it's only the last book, I think it's the 5th book, that you realize a character that you had thought was a man all along is actually a woman. And it was just brilliantly done, and it made me want to go back and reread how she had done it, because it wasn't just about that aha moment. It was about the build up to it and the story that went along with it and the emotional investment that you have in your characters. For me, that's the most important thing. Setting is obviously wonderful. It's the canvas upon which you paint your world. But if I'm not there and invested in the characters and their journey, it doesn't matter if you've placed like this brilliant aha moment or twist, or you have this wonderful mystery. I won't care. I have to love your characters, and I have to love mine. So.
Love that. Rory, how about you?
In a similar way, I think I love setting. That's what I write a book for, is so that I can hang out somewhere. Like, I don't go right to who I'm writing through, but to me it usually ends up being so important, because I'm not Karen is great at, she builds these multiple points of view, and I'm not as great at that. So I usually stick with like one main point of view. And so that means you have to choose who that is really carefully. And that's really where it sits for me, is figuring out who the best person is going to be to get through this landscape, knowing the least at the beginning and who cares about finding out that big thing at the end. So for Burn Our Bodies Down, Margot really has this impetus to find out what's going on. That's more than just like, what's happening, I want to know what's happening. Like, it matters to her on an emotional level. And I think that's what I really try to do. And what I think a lot of writers, if not all writers, try to do, is make sure that while things on the story level do matter, it's also wanting to see how they affect the character, and making sure that we care both as a, like, I want to know what's going on. There's that little like tick in my brain that I have to satisfy, and on an arcing level for like the emotional journey, so to speak. Oh my God. Think of that in like capital letters, capital E, capital J, emotional journey.
Those are all great answers. And I love this little thing in the chat that says your mysteries all have side hustles. Okay, so my next question is for all of you, and that is, you all obviously have quite the reputation for taking your readers by surprise, not necessarily by one huge plot twist, but by keeping us on our toes the entire time. But did a particular scene, character, or even whole book ever take you by surprise while you were writing it? Jess, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, I think that the hardest character that I wrote in They Wish They Were Us, which is Jill's boyfriend. His name is Henry. And I went through so many different iterations of who this guy was and kind of what he meant to Jill. And Jill is kind of this, this young woman who's really kind of figuring out who she is and what she wants and what she's looking for in life, not necessarily in a romantic partner. And Henry is just kind of like there for a lot of the book. I don't think that's a spoiler. He's like very much a part of the plot, but his emotional journey with Jill was very difficult for me to figure out, because it was not the central part of the book. But I felt so much kind of like pressure as a new author, I think, to kind of cram a romance in there that in the first draft of the book, it was very prominent. And then by the end of the book, or by the end of the writing and revising process, I really figured out like what his purpose was in this story. And it just wasn't what I thought it was all along. And I think that was like a real gift of kind of learning that not every book or every story needs to like have every single layer of like what I like to read. Like it can kind of go in a lot of different directions. And, it didn't need to be like one of the central storylines. And that was such a freeing moment to have. And I ended up falling in love with him myself, which is great, I think. But Jill has her own thoughts about that, I would say.
I'm so glad it turned out the way it did, because I love Henry. Karen, how about you? Have you ever been taken by surprise?
Yeah, the character of Addie surprised me a little bit. Not necessarily the journey she went on, because I wanted her on that path, but her voice surprised me a bit. She turned out to be funnier than I thought she was going to be. At least I think she's funny. She had this very gallows sense of humor about what was happening to her as her perfect life is falling apart, which isn't necessarily how I envisioned her reacting to it initially. Honestly, I thought she'd be a lot whinier about it, and she definitely had her moments, but she also, I think, just sort of showed these flashes of the strength that she had and some of her observations. And that, just as an author, was a really fun thing to discover about her. And it was something I ended up writing into the book when another character says to her, "Oh, it's nice to see you acting more like yourself. The first time we met, you were really funny." And she's like, "I'm not funny." But she actually is, and she eventually comes to appreciate a lot of different things about herself. And I think it sort of started with the fact that she always had these parts within her, but she didn't know how to bring them out, and some of the stress and the fear and the trauma that she was experiencing kind of led her to be a lot less careful than she was used to being.
I love that answer because she was absolutely one of my favorites in One of Us is Lying.
Oh, good.
Renee, how about you?
I think for me, it's sort of like a technical surprise. I usually write books that are in third person past, because I've always I've been afraid a little bit about first person present. It's just third person past came to me much more easily. And when I was writing the POV of Bastion in The Damned, all of my books have running POVs, like many different POVs. And again, they're always usually in third person past. His came through in first person present, very, very clearly in first person present, which was interesting because in I guess the killer in the first book, whose identity you don't get until the very end, was also first person present. And I had never had a situation where those voices came through so clearly for me. So at both of those junctures, when I was going through and beginning to write with the intention of doing everything third person past, they came through so clearly first person present. That was sort of what took me off guard. And I remember I would try to write in third person and get a page or two down, and I would have slipped into first person present and have to go back. And I was like, I shouldn't fight this anymore. And it was really cool to have a character's voice come through that clearly. That's always, I think, whenever I'm speaking to other writers, it's such a joy when you're crafting a story and you come up with these characters and their narratives and where this book is going to take them, and then their voice just comes through so clearly and so readily as if they're sitting next to you. It's one of my favorite things.
Absolutely. His POV is so compelling in The Damned too.
Thank
so
you.
Good. Rory, how about you?
Well, I mean, first of all, that's why I love doing these panels, because it's so interesting. I'm the complete opposite of Renee. If I sit down, it's coming out in first person present, and I have to actively work to do anything else, which I just think is so cool that people can have such disparate processes and still work through and come out with something that they're proud of. Yeah, so as far as what surprised me, with Burn Our Bodies Down, there's a character called Tess who lives in the town that Margot visits, and she's kind of the prom queen, very popular, very privileged. Her family owns a lot of the land around there, and she's very bored and is looking to find a story around her because she wants to be entertained. That's what she wants in life. And for the first 4 or 5 drafts of the book, Margot arrived in town and fell completely head over heels for Tess, and they had I'll say a romance. Nothing with me is true romance. It always ends pretty badly, but oops. But they had a thing, and it ended up being that relationship just wasn't what the book needed. It's kind of similar to what you were talking about, Jess, where it was more important that Margot see sort of the other side of the coin in Tess, that she get there and be like, oh, this is who I could have been if I'd been born here. This is who I could have been if I'd known about my family, and how does that make me feel? And am I okay with that? I don't know. And that was more important than the romance. And I also think that surprised me because I write queer books about queer characters, and there's this kind of pressure to equate queer representation with queer romance, and those aren't the same thing, but sort of disengaging them from each other was tough for me. And I had to work out a way to get myself to a place where I thought Margot is a lesbian. She says on page that she's a lesbian, and that's representation. She doesn't have to kiss anyone to be representation. Like, I'm single right now and I'm still queer. Like, that is how that works. So I think that relationship that existed and then didn't was a big surprise to me, but I'm glad that we ended up where we did.
And I loved Tessa's and Margot's relationship. It was so well done. I'm going to jump in here and remind everyone, if you're watching, now is the time to start sending in your cues for the authors. We're going to be taking them in a few minutes, and until then I have a couple more questions for you all. So my next one is a little change of pace. Who of all of your characters is most like you, and why? Jess, how about you go first?
Well, I think the obvious answer is Jill. She's our protagonist, and she's the one who we follow as she tries to figure out who killed her best friend when she was a freshman. But, you know, I think that in all of my characters, there's a little piece of me in everyone. You know, like my interests and my hobbies, like I try to kind of like sprinkle them throughout all of the characters. But Jill was, of course, the one who I most connected with in terms of her desire to learn more about the world outside of the one that she's currently in. And as a debut author, I just kind of like threw my whole entire like teenage self into this book and wrote, like, you know, I've like pulled from my diaries like when I was a teenager and was like, what, like I was so, you know, obsessed with like boys at that point in my life, and was like trying to kind of like find these moments in my diaries that I could pull to be like, what does Jill want most in life? And some of that came from the romance, and most of it honestly came about when I was writing about Jill and her female friends and the way that she feels so obsessed with them and so loyal to them, but also so conflicted about, you know, their relationship. And she's really jealous at some points, and she's very, you know, obsessive about them and wants to kind of like live inside of them in a way that I think that I certainly felt as a teenage girl. And so that's really what I wanted to put into her character. But it is, you know, kind of awkward when my mom is reading it and she's like, this is kind of how you were as a kid. And I don't know about this.
That is a great answer. Thank you for sharing. Karen, can I ask you next?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Jess, I do put it feels like a little piece of myself in every character. Like, I'm ambitious like Bronwyn. I'm a people pleaser like Cooper. I'm obsessed with true crime like Ellery. Most recently, there's a character named Knox in One of Us Is Next. And I feel like I gave Knox all of my annoying personality quirks, you know, like he has an irrational hatred of malls. He opens his sugar packets like 3 at a time because he thinks that will mean people aren't noticing how much sugar he's putting into his coffee. Like, this is just 1 pack and it does not work, but he does it anyway. And also, he's one of those kids who doesn't, you know, he thinks he's one thing. He's always been a drama kid. He thinks like that's his path. But he's a senior at this point, or he's a junior at this point. He's trying to think more seriously about what he wants to do with his life. And he kind of stumbles into this internship with Eli who works for a social justice firm, you know, defending people who've been accused of crimes. And that turns into be a real passion for him. And so he's one of those kids, kind of like me, I think, that you know, they think they're one thing and everybody else thinks they're one thing. And then as it turns out, you know, there's something else that kind of grabs onto their passion and sends them in a different direction.
Love that. I love all the little details too. Renee, can I ask you?
This is a tough question. I definitely agree with both Jessica and Karen that you put a little bit of yourself in all your characters. With my first series, The Wrath and the Dawn, Shahrazad was a character, that was who I wanted to be when I was 16. She always has a ready quip. I always was one of those people who had it like maybe 10, 20 seconds too late. As you're walking away, you're like, I should have said that. And she's just so like smart and funny, and just like she catches everybody's attention when she walks into a room. And I think, you know, a lot of 16-year-olds wish they could be that person. With Mariko, who is the heroine of the Flame in the Mist series, I modeled her a lot after my sister, who's a brilliant scientist. That is definitely not me, so that was really, really fun. When I was constructing Celine for The Beautiful, that was actually it was scary and cathartic all at once, because I think of all the characters I've ever written, she's the most like me. And I remember when I was drafting this and I was sending it to one of my best friends who's also a beta reader, her name's Saba, I'm sure you know who she is. I was like, I'm really scared with Celine, and she's like, this girl's a lot like you. And I was like, I know it's frightening, but also wonderful. I was drafting The Beautiful during the Kavanaugh hearings, and I remember just like me and a lot of other women in my circle were just like, we had this like seething undercurrent of rage going on during all of that. And the inciting incident for The Beautiful is that Celine kills a boy who tries to rape her. And she flees Paris because if she's caught, she'll be hanged. And that to me was a very cathartic thing to write. Unfortunately, we do still live in a world where, 3 out of 5 women have experienced some form of sexual assault. I'm one of them. And writing that into a book was scary and cathartic. And I felt like powerful in a way too. And I remember speaking to people about this. I remember reading Lori Halse Anderson speak when I was much younger, and how much it moved me and how much it resonated with me. And I wanted to write a book where the main character's darkness, the dark things that have happened to her, they don't define and shape who she is solely. They're a part of her. That's not necessarily even something you have to tell somebody to overcome. It's something that exists. And in that darkness, you can find something beautiful about yourself to grow and challenge and learn from. And that you don't need to be worried about blaming yourself. That was something that was very, very important to me when I was writing Celine as a character, because she had that very real reaction of blaming herself. But then she also had the very interesting reaction of not being sorry for what she did. And to me, that was very meaningful.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing, Renee.
Absolutely.
Rory, can I ask you next?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is that it would be the bear in Wilder Girls. The bear is just living its life and also has a lot of aggression pent up. So that's me. But I think the long answer is Margot from Burn Our Bodies Down. She was someone who was tough for me to write. She's grown up in an emotionally abusive household, and that means that she has this mindset where she doesn't want to ask any questions, because she knows that when you ask questions, when you make a fuss, that's when things get bad. It's better to just be quiet and to be like as good as you can be, but it's very hard to do. And that was something that was an environment that I grew up in, that I wanted to put on the page, both as a way to speak to anybody who's gone through that, but also to sort of confirm that, like, if that is something that you think has happened to you, it's real, it happens, because so much of Margot's life is just gaslighting, like is being told that things didn't happen the way that she thinks that they did, or that she's remembering things wrong. And that can really just like mess you up. That can really change who you are as a person, to look back at your past and wonder like, wait, did any of that actually happen? Or am I just being like dramatic? So I wanted to put the book in a position where it can say like, yeah, like it did happen, but like Renee said, that can be part of you, but it doesn't have to be who you are going forward. You can break that pattern. You don't owe your family a connection. If you want to keep in contact, that's great. Like for me, I'm very close with my mom now, but like you don't have to. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people hear is like, oh, they're your family, you give them a chance. But like that's not always true. Sometimes it is, but it isn't always. So that was sort of the like option that I wanted to put in the book, that Margot could take what I felt and speak to somebody else about it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rory. And Margot is beautifully written. Okay, is everyone ready to move into our lightning round before we go into our audience Q&A? So for this one, there's no particular order. Just chime in with whatever your answers are, and they're going to be more lightning questions. They're a little bit faster. So our first question is, what is your favorite trope?
Enemies to lovers.
Mutual fighting.
Enemies to
Found
lovers, yeah.
family.
Love it.
Jess?
Oh, enemies to lovers. I think I said it, but it probably got drowned out.
Sorry.
Yeah. Same.
How about
Yeah.
you, Rory?
Mutual pining. I want them to both think that it's unrequited. And it's not, but they don't know it.
Classic. So my next question, and I'm going to explain the lingo for anyone in the chat who may not know. A planner is someone who plans their entire book ahead of time, whereas a pantser tends to write and fly by the seat of their pants, and just kind of go along with it. So my question for you all is, are you a planner or a pantser, or a combination of both?
I'm a very bad planner. So I'll plan it, but it's not right. So then I have to pants it.
I do the same. Yeah. Sorry, I outline and then change the whole book and pretend like the outline was what got me the book, basically.
I'm a reformed pantser because I did pants One of Us is Lying, and that turned out okay. So I was like, yeah, this is how you write a book. And that did not work out for Two Can Keep a Secret. I had to rewrite it 3 times, which I do not recommend. That is neither an efficient nor a fun way to write a book. And so the only way I was able to drag out of that was planning. So now I appreciate an outline.
Renee?
Definitely a planner. Although I'm sort of coming to a place where I feel like the best way to be would be if I could be somebody who knew, what do they say, that the headlights author, the one that knows what's happening directly in front of them, that might not know exactly where they're going around the next bend. Because I find when I'm speaking to authors who are pantsers, I love that organic spark of inspiration they have that I don't necessarily give myself room to experience because I'm so married to a plot point. And when people come to me, they're like, well, you should do this. I'm like, no, then I have to do this and I have to change all this other stuff. And eventually I do see the merit in their suggestion and I have to do it anyway. So it would be nice if I weren't so attached to a plot and then wouldn't have to watch it just crumble to me.
Awesome. All right. So our next question is, did you always want to be a writer? And if not, what did 5-year-old you want to be?
Oh, I did. And in fact, I put on my Instagram recently because my parents were moving and they found this old box of my stuff. And it included this, essentially a mission statement I wrote when I was 8 years old about how I wanted a machine to make copies of my books so they would be in the bookstore and everybody would read them. So that was always what I wanted to do. But I did take some detours, and do some other stuff before I got there.
Karen had a plan.
I did have a plan. I wanted to sell thousands of copies. So I was thinking big.
Renee, how about you?
No, I didn't always want to be a writer. Both of my parents are musicians and they really sort of drilled into us when we were younger, don't be an artist, you'll be starving forever. So I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to be one of these, the jobs that seemed to be lucrative. So but I'm very happy that didn't come to pass. It was what I wanted to do as a major in college, but I think I'm much happier in a much better place. I don't think law would have brought out the best in me.
We're all grateful you all ended up as writers. Jess, how about you?
Yeah, similar to Karen, I always wanted to be a writer, and my parents were cleaning out the basement and they found a drawing that I did in 2nd grade that was I want to grow up and I want to be a writer and a reporter. And on one side, it was I had drawn me as a traffic reporter, reporting live from the Long Island Expressway. And the other half was me in a room alone writing. And my day job, I'm actually an editor at Cosmopolitan magazine. So somehow 2nd grade me really just kind of dreamed this into fruition. And I love her immensely for it.
You are always writing. Some form
Truly,
always writing.
Yeah.
Rory, how about you?
I definitely wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. My first book was called Detective Pony. I was 6 years old. I illustrated it. It was amazing. There's a sequel, Detective Pony Finds the Diamonds. He finds the diamonds in it, if you were wondering what happened. But alongside being a writer, I also had many other phases. I had an astronomer phase, a track sprinter phase, a geologist phase, a forensic anthropologist phase, which would have been bad for everybody. But the writer in the background was we'll just wait until you finish what you're doing now and you can come back to this. I'm
going to need a copy of Detective Pony. I'm just saying. No.
It's very short, It's a quick read.
All right, next question is, what is your writing kryptonite? Netflix, Twitter, reading other books, can be anything.
Netflix and Twitter. Like, I have those open right now. I just love TV. I love it so much.
It used to be food for me, but I have a 5-month-old, so that's now my writing kryptonite. It is impossible to get anywhere significant in your work with a 5-month-old. A smiling, cooing 5-month-old sitting next to
And
me.
you said it was food at first?
With food before, yeah. I
love that.
I really like food. I would always have like Cheetos, and I would eat them with chopsticks because I didn't want to have the cheese dust on my keyboard.
I feel that in my soul after reading all the food descriptions in The Beautiful, particularly.
Oh, thank you. I do really like food.
Quality food descriptions. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, mine is social media too. I think it's so insidious because you're like, I'm just gonna check, and then it's an hour later and you're in like 6 conversations and you haven't even looked at your book, and it sort of feels productive because you're like, yeah, I'm, engaging with my peers. This is part of my job, but really it's not. At least not all day.
Yeah, I'm the same kind of social media person where like all of a sudden I'm like on Twitter and then I'm on Instagram, like on my desktop, and then I'm like, this isn't productive. Let me like go to my phone and go to Twitter instead. And then all of a sudden I have like all of the apps open on like my phone and my computer, and it's like an hour later and I'm like, cool.
Well, we want to leave some time for our audience questions, so I have just one more lightning round question for you all, and that is to describe your latest book in 3 words. It's everyone's favorite question.
Family first, always.
You have your tagline is 3 words. That's not fair.
It's my tagline.
Oh, mine's longer than 3 words. Fine.
Vampires and werewolves.
True.
Corn is dangerous.
That's accurate.
Privilege at school.
Also accurate. Thank you so much, you all. We're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A. I've got some questions coming in through my phone, so I'm going to pull those up now. And the first one is, for everyone, how will their writings be affected by the pandemic, i.e. possible to write characters without masks? Jess, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'm working on my second book now, which will be out next summer. And my editor and I had a conversation about this where we were kind of like, do we bring this up? Is this part of it? We landed on the consensus, no. The pandemic does not exist in my second book. I don't know about, future works, but we're just pretending like it didn't happen.
It's a nice thought.
I know.
Karen, how about you?
Same. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky as a contemporary author, right? Because on one hand, we are supposed to reflect reality. On the other hand, I personally do not want to read about this time, nor do I want to write about it. So I have decided I am now a contemporary fantasy author, and everybody just exists in an alternate universe where this is not happening. It would also make the kind of books I write very difficult. There has to be a lot of interaction. You have to be able to recognize people. There are just certain things that do not work particularly well with a mystery.
I love that contemporary fantasy author. New one. Renee, I guess it's a little bit different since you get to write historical fiction, right?
Yep, I don't have to deal with this problem. And also, I really like writing kissing books, so it would be really awkward if I had to write kissing books with masks.
That is fair. Rory?
I feel like I already did my quarantine book. There's a significant quarantine in Wilder Girls, and they are also dealing with their own disease. So I feel like I did my job with that, and so now I'm just not going to touch it at all.
That is fair. Margot was absolutely giving me her quarantine vibes while I was reading it, because she's in that house for a while. Question 2 for everyone. What are some techniques you use when crafting characters to try and ensure that readers care just as much about you do about your character? So how do you make readers really care about your character? Jess, how about you?
I mean, I think the best way to do that, or the best way that I found to do that, was just to make them as real and authentic as possible. so that readers could just envision them walking around in their lives and feel real empathy towards them. And I tried to write my characters with as much empathy as I could and try to see, their desires and their perspectives as clearly as possible and just make them as real as possible, because I think that's the way that, I connect with characters on the page when I'm reading, and I just wanted to do that as much as possible as well.
Karen?
Whenever I'm starting to think about characters at the beginning of the story, I ask a lot of questions, and some of them are just sort of details, background, family, friends, but the core questions are, what do they fear? What do they want? And what do they need? And are those last two different? Because there's a lot of interesting tension that can come if they are. And if I know that, and if those answers are compelling, then I can give them, I hope, an arc that'll be compelling for the reader to follow, because people who want things will do things to get them, they'll hide things from other people, and they're the kind of active protagonists that you are interested in.
It's a great answer. Renée, how about you?
I think for me, it rests a lot in flaws. I think that is what resonates the most when I'm dealing with characters and having them read very true to me in other people's books, that they have skills, they could be extremely beautiful, extremely accomplished, but I want to know, what are their flaws? What are the things that will destroy them in this book? And what are the things that they are going to have to rebuild about themselves? That to me really resonates. And so I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what this particular character, not just what do they want, what do they need? And if I give it to them, can I give it to them in a way that is not exactly how they wanted it? And how are they going to learn and grow from this? And if I give it to them, can I take it away so that we can really bring to light what's at issue in their character and their personality?
You're also thinking about how to break our hearts while
Yeah.
you're is what you're saying. Rory, how about you?
Yeah, I think it comes down to flaws for me, but I also think about when I'm asking a reader to care about a character, what do I personally as a writer think of as being care? Like, I don't create characters for you to like them. Especially because likability is like a prison that we put women in. So I just need you to want to turn the page. And so for Margot, I think her mindset is kind of frustrating for some readers because she doesn't want to ask questions. She doesn't want to blow up this new world that she's found, but she does want to find things out. So there's this tension in her. And I think that can be really frustrating for a reader, but I'm okay if you're caring about the characters, that you're frustrated and that you want to find out what's going to happen. Like, that works for me. Not liking someone and wanting to see if they get their comeuppance at the end, that works for me too. Like, it's just making sure that my definition of care is broad enough to encompass everything that I want to do, and making sure that anytime I catch myself thinking, is she likable, that I take that right out of my head, because I don't need you to like her. I just need you to want to turn the page. And that's really the guiding principle for me. And flaws really play a key role in that.
I love that. That's a great answer. So my next question for everyone is, what is your day-to-day writing process? And could you also talk briefly about getting published? Jess, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So my day-to-day is usually that I write in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m. And then, like I said, I'm an editor at a magazine full-time. So my days are eaten up doing that. And my brain just like shuts off at night, and it's just like, you need to go watch Real Housewives of Beverly Hills for like 6 hours. So I don't really write at night. And I try to do quite, big sprints on the weekends. Yeah, it's like kind of an interesting mind frame to juggle all of that.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, when I started writing, I had a full-time job, and the only time I could write was from like 9 to midnight. So that was what I did. I would sit down, I would write then. And I'm kind of a night owl, so it worked anyway. And now I write full-time, but I find that's still the best time for me. So I do try to make myself write during the day. I try to get as much done as I can, but I end up doing a lot of just administrative stuff, promotional type of things. And then I save my really intense drafting for the evening. That just seems to work better for me.
That is mad impressive that you were working at the same time as writing that first book too, though.
As a single mom too, well, I still am. So that was a lot going on while trying to write that book.
Superhero status. Renee, how about you?
Same as Karen, actually. I do a lot of writing at night. And now, even though it was a night owl before I had my baby, before we had our son, it still really works because he's asleep at night. So I can get solid work in. And also, you know, no one's sending you a bunch of emails, a bunch of text messages. Your phone isn't blowing up. There's not a lot going on. And I really like being Gollum over my computer in the dark, you know, with like hot Cheetos. So I remember. Yeah. So that's my thing at night.
Rory, how about you?
I used to be one of those people who loved to write in public, like in coffee shops, not just like out in the street. But that is sadly not accessible to me anymore, for the time being. So I write here at this like really, really not great standing desk that I put together out of IKEA, like factory reject furniture. And yeah, I work in the afternoon mostly, which is technically morning for me because I'm like semi-nocturnal. But I freelance for a couple of other jobs too. The great thing is that they're pretty flexible. So it's really just like a jigsaw puzzle of what's going to work on any given day. But yeah, I'm inside and I don't like it.
Keeping very busy. All right, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So the next one is, could each author share one tip in crafting a thriller or a horror story? Jess?
Oh my gosh. I think my tip would just be to create like the most compelling main character that you can. Or if you have multiple main characters, like the person who you're going to be following on this journey has to be compelling enough to make you actually want to figure out what the answer to the big mystery is that you're putting on the page. I think that you could come up with like the most unbelievable story, but if you don't have the people along the way to guide you on that journey, like to me that's not something that I want to read.
So creating that really strong cast and main character. Karen, how about you?
I would say, I mean, as much as I do plan a lot in advance now and I do outline, I think it's okay if you don't know everything up front. Ideally, you know who done it and why, but maybe you don't know exactly how your protagonists get out of the situation that they're getting into. That was the case with my fifth book, which I just finished. My outline was literally, and then they get out of it. And I did not know until I was like 2/3 of the way through. And I did have to stop and say, okay, now is the time when you have to figure this out, Karen. And you cannot put it off any longer. But that's okay. And sometimes it's even better because you know more about them. You know what their strengths are. You know how they will act and react. And you can maybe better craft that moment or whatever moment it is that you have a placeholder for.
That's awesome. Renee, how about you?
I think for me, it's sensory details to make a really good thriller. And what I mean by that is like, I genuinely hope most of the people who are reading our books have not been placed in any of these situations because they're terrifying. But the things that for me really ground me in a narrative, especially if the character is going through something I'm not familiar with, are like you could be being chased by a killer in the dark. But if you're pressed up against a tree and an insect scuttles across your hand and you still have to keep silence. Like that's something that for that will get chills going down my back because I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have like a mysterious bug on your shoulder and scream about it and not be able to react in that situation. That's something that will really resonate. So I think for me, sensory details are really important in a good thriller.
Rory, how about you?
I think it's good at some point to sort of work backwards through the book. I usually do this like near the end of a draft where I'll see like where am I ending up and how is the information being revealed, but I try to do it backwards to see like what's extra, what I'm putting in that I don't need, because I usually find that sometimes I do like I usually start out under explaining and then I overcorrect and then I'm saying way too much and I have to like reel it back in. So that's really what I think helps me is to like get it on the page and then go to the end and work backwards and be like, okay, what's actually important?
Those are all great answers. And I think we're ready for our final question of the panel, and that is, who or what inspired you to become authors? Jess?
Honestly, I don't think I realized that being an author was like a profession that was like one that you could have because I didn't like grow up seeing many authors in my own life. And I didn't, I think when I was growing up, like now, like there wasn't really social media where you could like follow authors and like see what they do and like what their lives are like. And authors weren't really like out there as much as they are now, I think. So honestly, I think when I started to become an editor at magazines, and I was an editor at Entertainment Weekly, and I covered books, and I was constantly talking to authors and learning about the publishing industry from a journalism standpoint. And once I was able to see like how people did it and made lives this way and created art while doing other things, I was like, oh, this is something that I could also do in my spare time if I could get it together. And so I really looked up to authors like Jessica Knoll, who was also an editor at Cosmopolitan. And I read a couple interviews with her where she talked about balancing the two. And I was like, oh, this is a reality. And honestly, like to be totally frank, like Karen, One of Us Is Lying was like a huge inspiration to me when I was,
Hey.
I think it came out when I was like in the middle or towards the end of drafting They Wish They Were Us. And I was like, oh, like that's what I want to do. Like those are the kinds of books that I want to write. So it's so cool to be here with you because thank you so much.
That's so great. Oh, I love to hear that.
It's so true. And I think I read a couple interviews with you where you talked about like balancing your own day job as well. And I was just like, oh, like real people do this. Like this is a reality in a way that it didn't seem when I was growing up, or even, in my early 20s when I was starting out my career. So I just think like seeing other people do it in a way that, you see like the hardships, like, oh, I had a bad writing day. Like people talk about that all the time on Instagram. And it's like, it's very heartening to see, I think.
Karen, how about you?
I love that. I also did not think that writing was a job that I could do. I thought you had to like know somebody or something like that. So even though I had this very clear desire to do it, by the time I was in college, I just sort of gave it up. And it's not because anyone really told me I shouldn't do it. It's just I decided. I basically self-rejected. So whenever I talk to new writers now, I always tell them like, let someone else tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. But anyway, I did like lots of other things, and I really was not thinking about writing at all until I was taking this long flight and I didn't have anything to read, and I stopped in the bookstore and I grabbed The Hunger Games. And I got obsessed with that book. I was obsessed with the voice and the world and the characters. And for the first time in a really long time, I got inspired to write again. I wanted to create something. And so I sat down and I wrote like really bad Hunger Games ripoff, basically. And I thought it was amazing. And then I would, get published with this brilliant book, which of course did not happen because it wasn't good, but it was so fun to write. And that kind of turned that faucet on again. And I just kept doing it.
That's awesome. Renee, how about you?
Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned. I read it when I was 12 years old after my father told me I couldn't read it. Of course, I took the book that night. And I read it underneath the covers with a flashlight that was broken, so it was flickering the whole time. It was perfect. It was absolute perfection. And I was already a really voracious reader at that point, but that was the first time when I was reading Queen of the Damned. There's a very specific scene, and it felt hypnotic and utterly transportive. And I remember sort of pulling back in the covers and like I had a shiver go down my spine. I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that to somebody. So yeah.
Love that. Rory, how about you?
It would have to be my mom. She's a writer as well. I grew up with her, like she was querying, and this is like, early 2000s. So she was like printing out her manuscript and mailing it in, and she had a book with all the agents in it, like a book. And I was like, what is happening? So yeah, seeing her do it, seeing her actually pursue it really was what taught me that authors are a real thing, because my mom was there in the kitchen, like writing her book. I was like, whoa, that's kind of weird. I would like to do that, but also now I have to worry about doing the same thing as my mom. But yeah, she really just like, she showed me that it's possible, and also that it's hard, but I'm glad that I knew that going in.
That is the best. Well, on that great last answer, thank you so much to our amazing panelists, as well as our ASL interpreter for joining us today. Make sure to check out all of these amazing authors' recent or upcoming books. You can find the links to get your copy in the Zoom chat or at bookyoursummerlive.com. And we will see y'all later. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Bye,
coming.
everyone.